I'm Jose Hernandez, and I have been using a wheelchair since my accident in 1995. I guess if I had one message for the general public, it would be that I appreciate your help, but please ask first. I know you mean well, but I've actually got everything under control. And if I don't, I'll ask for assistance. People with disabilities just want the same respect and consideration as everyone else.
This is a message from United Spinal Association. Download our disability etiquette booklet at unitedspinal.org.
We filmed 15 Pennsylvania kids who were all waiting to be adopted and asked what having a family and permanent home would mean to them.
I want a family just to accept me for who I am, to be there just to support me whenever I'm needing it.
To be matched with a family would be amazing. I won't be in a system all the time.
Visit adoptpakids.org to watch the video, meet the kids, and learn how you can become a foster or adoptive parent.
Paid for with Pennsylvania taxpayer dollars.
This is the story of a very special woman. Just a few knew about her superpowers. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Listen to Laborers Live.
We created the weekend. We created the 40-hour work week. We just want enough to feed our family, be able to send our children to college, and let our next generation do better than we did.
To people that might have forgot how important unionism is in a country like the United States. People now infringing on our 8-hour workday, trying to work people more than 8 hours without overtime, trying to work people without benefits. In the long run, everybody's getting a fat paycheck except the worker. So this is really a wake-up call for America.
The struggle is continuous. Tune in to Laborers Live every Friday from 4 to 5 p.m. Sponsored by LESIT, the Laborers Employers Cooperation Education Trust of the Laborers District Council of Philadelphia and vicinity.
Local 332, Sam Staten Jr. Business Manager. Local 57, Esteban Vera Business Manager. Local 135, Dan Woodall Jr. Business Manager. Local 413, James Harper Jr. Business Manager. The Laborers District Council, Ryan Boyer Business Manager, and Tony Staten, Executive Director of LESIT.
Drive in with Solomon Jones. Drive home with Charles Ellison. This is Word Radio, 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD. Philadelphia, independent black media. The views and opinions expressed by the guests, listeners, and hosts of any program on Word Radio do not necessarily reflect those of ownership, management, or advertisers of this station. Word TV. We're streaming live video of this conversation right now. Tune in on YouTube at onWURD or on Facebook at Forward. Word TV. Black Talk Media.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. They don't know where he's coming from. They don't know. Tell them where you're coming from, so they know. Tell them where you're coming from, so they know.
Get free. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do. Gotta talk a line, go hard for the truth. My brothers ain't scared to death and go hard for the youth. But the youth is niggas going hard for the convertible coupe. I said, I'm trying to go hard to converse with the crew. Converse my crew with the words in the code. Said, it's cool, make it do what it do, but don't be in love with a system that's murdering you.
The world is testing me, but you said keep on shining. And though I feel what some could do to me, if I can't help hope, what's the use of being? Can you see where I'm coming from? You could know. Can you see where I'm coming from? You could know. I was for things that may not come on its own.
السلام عليكم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Welcome to Islam Today, Muslim Black Talk Media. We're on 96.1 FM, 900 AM, and we're live streamed at WURD.com. And we're also, you can call us on 866-361-0900. So, WRDradio.com is where we're live streamed, and everyone should be joining us today because we have a very momentous and a very tough discussion ahead of us. Today is Saturday, October the 5th. It is the 6th of Safar, 1441 on the Hijri of the Muslim calendar, and it is actually a very sunny 62 degrees. We're in autumn officially, and we opened up with the standard or the traditional greetings of peace be upon you, and we seek refuge with Almighty God from the rejected, the accursed enemy, Shaitan. We seek refuge with him from those evil whisperings or those deeds or those inordinate things that appear within our own or represent within our own selves or our own souls. Therefore, know whomever Allah guides, no man can misguide, and whomever Allah sends astray, no man can guide. And then we said the Kalima Shahadatain, and that is the two-part testimony that every Muslim gives, and that is, I bear witness and give open testimony that there's no deity, nothing worthy of worship except Almighty God. He is alone. He has no associate or partner, and I bear witness that Muhammad ibn Abdullah, unto whom the Quran was revealed, is his slave, servant, and final messenger. Today, we're going to be talking about the much talked about. That is the case in Dallas, Texas, where our brother Botham Jean was murdered by Amber Geiger, and the results of the sentencing and the guilty verdict kind of caught a lot of people off guard. And so today, on the line with us, we have three very powerful black sisters who are going to head the discussion. I'm going to ask them some questions, but our first guest is Sister Naomi Washington Leapart. She's the mayor. She's from the Mayor's Office of Public Engagement and was just hired, I think, 2 weeks ago, and she's going to take that office next week. And she's the Director of Faith-Based and Interfaith Affairs for the city of Philadelphia. Our other guest is the immutable PhD student, anthropology research student at Rutgers University, who concentrates her efforts in race, ethnicity, Islamophobia, gender, religion, language, media, representation, and Islam in America. Her dissertation is an ethnographic study of Islam, race, spirituality, and protest through an examination of black Muslim activism in the northeastern U.S. within the context of Black Lives Matter movement. And my final guest is one who's nearest and dearest to my heart, nearest and dearest to Philadelphia, and nearest and dearest to United Muslim Masjid, and that is the Dr. Camila Rashad, who just earned, wasn't awarded, earned her PsyD from Chestnut Hill College. She is also the founder of the Muslim Wellness Foundation and the creator of the annual Black Muslim Psychology Conference, and a strong black Muslima who wears so many hats, as well as a wife to me and a mother to our 3-year-old son, Izzy. Assalamu alaikum to everyone.
Wa alaikum salam. Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having us.
Yes, yes. So today we're having that discussion, I guess, that everybody's having. I think the previous host talked about it. Everybody's talking about it in their coffee clutches, at their dinner tables, at the Starbucks. I mean, it was quite a surprise to first get the guilty verdict. I think a lot of people were not expecting that a white female police officer would be convicted. They had a diversified jury, I think, of 9 blacks and 1 white guy. I'm not certain of that, but if you guys know more about the makeup of the jury, by all means, I can stand corrected. But once the verdict came through, then the following day, within 24 hours, we got a sentence of 10 years for Amber Geiger. And there's so many things that we can reflect upon, but particularly in the, I guess, against the movement of Black Lives Matter and how we see the inordinate convictions or non-convictions for police officers. I would like Donna to start off and talk about a little bit about that history, how we have had to suffer and watch these non-convictions or these disproportionate sentencing for police officers, particularly white police officers who have killed black people.
Well, I mean, that history goes back very far. You know, police officers, law enforcement personnel have been inflicting violence on people in our communities for centuries. And in fact, as I like to point out to people, the very origins of organized policing in the United States begin with slave patrols, right, which were vigilante crews of whites dispatched to catch and apprehend runaway enslaved people, right? So the very sort of origins of how U.S. policing begins has its roots in violence against black people, right? And so there's long been sort of this association with being able to commit violence without repercussions, or, you know, being above the law or not necessarily accountable to what other people might be accountable when they commit acts of violence against another person. Within recent years, of course, we've seen this issue come back to the fore as an issue of concern under organized protests across the country, and under what we came to call the Black Lives Matter movement. So Ferguson, Baltimore, Baton Rouge, all of these places within the last 5 years or so have seen dramatic, spectacular flare-ups of this, around this issue, right? But generally speaking, of course, what happens is that it's rare to secure an indictment in any of these cases, much less a conviction. Generally speaking, and for example, in the case of Freddie Gray in Baltimore, that was a huge surprise when the state's attorney in that particular case announced that she was actually going to indict the officers with murder, because that's rare for that to even happen. In most of these cases, what happens is happened with Eric Garner, as happened with so many others. Generally speaking, there's not even, the state generally doesn't find sufficient cause to even bring charges, right? So for there to be a guilty verdict in this case was in fact a surprise, a hopeful surprise, at least to me, and many other people who are watching this case, because none of us, long precedent sort of conditions us, or has conditioned many of us to sort of expect that there's no sort of accountability that ever is built into this process for these types of cases.
So also what we see in some of these tragedies is the edifice of forgiveness, how often black folks come to that point where we saw in the Dylan Roof case, where he went to the church in South Carolina and murdered 9 African Americans in prayer. And the families went straight to, well, we forgive him. And a lot of people were bewildered by that. And so we saw Botham's brother take the stand and shockingly say he didn't want to even see Amber Geiger go to jail, and he asked, or he pleaded with the judge, could he hug her? And he offered his sentiments of forgiveness. And so I would like to ask Reverend Naomi, how do we as a people reconcile all of the mayhem that's thrown upon us by white racists and white nationalists, particularly when they take black lives, and then the go-to card is often forgiveness, even in the wake of the moment?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that Brant Jean, his brother, consistently did in that victim impact statement was to reference his faith, to reference his belief that not only was he compelled to forgive out of a sort of obligation related to his Christian faith, but that God would forgive Amber Geiger if she asks for forgiveness. And there was some also content around conversion, wanting her to convert, give her life to Christ. I think that's what he said. And so I think that we can't talk about this kind of phenomenon of black forgiveness without also interrogating the ways in which people learn to forgive in Christian religious communities, and are taught that forgiveness is an act that is obligatory, that is connected to one's sense of loyalty and faithfulness to God, and that forgiveness is in some ways separate from or has nothing to do with the one who has offended. So whether they ask for forgiveness, whether they actually express remorse, is irrelevant. And so, I, as a person who was, I will use the word indoctrinated because that's how I have experienced it, indoctrinated with that kind of teaching on forgiveness, watched that victim impact statement video with tears in my eyes, because it struck me as very familiar. I know that script, I know that line, right? But I'm not sure that what I was seeing was what I would believe is the actual substance and nature and content of forgiveness. So I think it is rooted in a particular understanding of what the Christian Bible seems to suggest about forgiveness. It's been taught, it's been learned, it's been conditioned. I would argue that it's an uninterrogated notion of forgiveness that needs to be sort of sifted through, as you said, the context of white supremacy, white nationalism, racialized violence against black people. And it's unfortunate that forgiveness has been, I think, sort of the edges of forgiveness have been smooth, right? And it ends up translating into something kind of, I think, vapid, right? Something that feels empty. And let me just say that, I'm not interested in interrogating or pathologizing one individual's process of mourning, of lament, but I am interested in the conditions that create a narrative or a notion of forgiveness that doesn't serve black folk well. What is actually serving us well? What actually helps us to be whole and healthy?
Now, would you say from a Judeo-Christian perspective, and even if you have any knowledge of Islam, that forgiveness is compulsory? Because it gives the impression that, if you don't forgive, then you're in a state of sin, and the person who has caused the harm or the offense is benefiting in some strange sort of way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one theological worldview, that God will not forgive you if you don't forgive others. So on the one hand, you know, it's directly connected to your relationship with God. How you relate to others is how God will relate to you. And the additional teaching could be that forgiveness is obligatory, and that forgiveness serves to release you from bitterness, hatefulness, seeking vengeance, and that would work toxically inside of you. And so forgiveness is for you; it has nothing to do with the other person. That is one theological worldview. I wouldn't say it's the only one. I think maybe it is the predominating one in many Christian communities.
So, Dr. Cam, I would like to first say congratulations on receiving your PhD, your PsyD. It has been a long time coming from myself. Much love. I love you dearly. The community is probably the bigger recipient of all of your hard work, and we just want you to know that we love you, we support you. If you want to say anything about your journey on to the PsyD or any announcements, by all means, take the floor, and I'll sit back and hold my question.
Well, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and peace to everyone who's listening. I'll sort of save my comments about my own personal journey if we have time left over. But I do want to add to the contributions that Reverend Naomi and that Donna have made to the conversation by first prefacing my statements with, this conversation is very complicated, and I think it's often very painful for us to have publicly, because we are often not afforded the luxury or the privilege of having a nuanced dialogue about this, that we are often pitted against one another almost immediately, because the predominant sort of mainstream media narrative is, look at how amazing and, mature and brilliant and wise Brandt Jean is for offering this gesture of forgiveness and grace. And so for Black folks that have complicated emotions and their own personal experiences related to violence and white supremacy, it's almost like we are not allowed to have a complicated response. It is either you forgive and you adopt this, sort of white mainstream narrative, or you will paint your own people in a bad light. So for everyone listening and for us in this conversation, I just want to say we are very well aware that there is complexity to this conversation, that I think we think very thoughtfully about what we say publicly, because this is sort of not a conversation just amongst family. And we know how our words can kind of be twisted and used against one another. And so when we see this happening on Facebook, on Twitter, friends kind of disagreeing, I would say the disagreement is also very much infused with the pain we are all individually feeling. And we cannot have this conversation without acknowledging and understanding that every aspect of our lives, from our faith, identity, ideas about healing, suffering, trauma, that we can't have an understanding without acknowledging the presence and the impact of violence and colonization and enslavement and white supremacy. So when we're speaking, it is often from a place of pain, but also of resilience and strength and joy. And so I want people to understand that, that when we take sort of these principled stances or want to have a nuanced debate, that is very difficult, and we don't do this lightly. And with that said, from the point of view of sort of psychology and mental health and also trauma, it's ironic that of all the headlines that I saw, especially written by non-Black people, it was, this is just, an almost awesome display of, forgiveness, and this is what other people should strive to emulate. And in some ways, at the same time, I feel like it robs us of our humanity, right? So as a people, we need to, in order to prove our humanity to others, to white people, we must almost be extraordinary, right? And ironically, like superhuman.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to get that kind of validation, then we have to be, kind of the epitome of something that is almost a fantasy, right? Because we're human beings. And so we're having this very sort of complicated experience where, on the one hand, if we don't offer this, right, this unasked for and unrepentant forgiveness, right, on the part of the offender, that sort of proves our inferiority, right? Like, why can't they do this? And at the same time, it robs us of the ability to engage with all of the emotions that are triggered when this violence occurs. And, there's one psychologist, his name is Dr. Kenneth Hardy. He talks about the wounds of racial trauma and rage being one of them. And, not rage in the sense of being, uncontrolled and reckless, but that when you are hurt, you feel pain and you feel rage, right? Especially when this degradation happens repeatedly. And we are often blocked, right? Or it is implied in the way these conversations kind of unfold that we do not have even the right to our own rage. And I think that's what upsets me more. It's like, yes, we can talk about forgiveness, but we also have to talk about the anger that we feel that is warranted and that is often ignored and minimized.
So, what?
If I can I just jump in here really
Please.
quickly? So Tam said something that like this irony, right? That I wanted to just sort of talk about a little bit more. This irony that like we're not seen as human, but then sort of expected to react in superhuman ways to these types of provocations. And the interesting thing about that for me is that as I was listening, I'm thinking, superhuman is also not human, right? It's a fact of not being human, right? And so, but what's that issue here? And sort of, I think what causes this is that relationships, macro relationships between white America and Black America depend fundamentally on the existence and sort of the perseverance of a mask. Right? W.E.B. Du Bois called this the veil, right? And Souls of Black Folks. He talked about Black Americans and how it felt to live life from behind the veil, right? Which means that there's a problem with seeing, right? And there's a problem with experiencing. There's a problem with touching. And so when the fundamental premise upon which the sort of original act of violence that built this nation, right, happened. We're talking about enslavement. We're talking about also Native disenfranchisement, right? Those acts depend upon fundamentally the understanding that the people who are on the receiving end of those acts of violence and those structures of violence are not human. They're not capable of feeling. They are not capable, right? And so so it's never, so as long as that's sort of the starting assumption, right, we're never going to get, this is always going to be an impasse because there's a certain type of like anesthesia that I think sort of has to accompany the fact that you are participating and at some level or another, right? Even if passively receiving benefits from a system that dehumanizes and inflicts violence upon other human beings. So you have to sort of obscure that in your mind, however you can, in order to sort of continue.
So is this let me interrupt. Is this superhuman capacity for forgiveness and the ability to kind of look the other way when you see, opposites, when it happens in the reverse way, you don't see the symbols of or the gestures of forgiveness coming from white Christians, from white Muslims, or whoever. You don't see those same things. Is this a part of, and a lot of people are saying this, slave conditioning, that for 400 years we were told and taught to love our oppressors, and regardless of the harm that they have visited upon us as a community. So is this an example of that?
I would just say briefly that uneven power relations means that they don't have to offer forgiveness. They're not forced to. They're not put in a position where, where they have to do that because the power structure supports their dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, you're not going to see reciprocity because the relationship is fundamentally lopsided and fundamentally abusive. And so in those sorts of relationships, there is no reciprocity.
What about the imagery? Yes, please.
I think, so I have to be honest and say I bristle a little bit at this idea or the conversation when it is framed as slave conditioning, because it still, I think, uses language that pathologizes enslaved people, right? And that we are so indoctrinated, we are so brainwashed, and look at how we behave. And it's like, let's turn this bright light on whiteness and on white supremacy, right? What system has been constructed such that these are the ways that traumatized people respond? And sort of like taking it out of the realm of look at these sort of depraved black people still responding like they're slaves, 150 or whatever, 200 years later. It is still not our problem, right? And there are other ways that we also respond. If you look at the wife of Eric Garner, she was having none of it.
Right.
Right. The first thing they asked her is, "Do you forgive the person who killed your husband?" And she said, "Hell no."
Yeah.
And so I think that, when we have these sort of like superhuman, extraordinary, praiseworthy, right, I put that in quotes, by mainstream media examples of, look at this immediate, right, before the sentence, literally, before the sentence is even passed down, right, someone is offering some forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that when we look at why are we responding in this way, it is important always to keep in mind the context, in that, yes, sometimes, we've resisted. There are other times that people are kind of in survival mode. And I think to add to what Donna mentioned is that there has been this abusive relationship. And so I think what we also need to consider is that, there's a book called My Grandmother's Hands, and it's written by a black male social worker named Rizwan Menakem. And he talks about this idea of soothing white bodies because of how dangerous and lethal they are to us.
Mm.
And so could the offer of forgiveness be one way to soothe, right, a dangerous body, right? And so the ways that Amber Geiger's tears and, just how helpless she felt and, I can't believe I did, so all of that is weaponized and could be dangerous for us. And so could the soothing of that particular body, but white people in general. Right?
So were those images that we saw that everyone is posting up virally of Judge Tammy giving her a hug, Botham's brother hugging her, and the sheriff, the deputy in the court stroking her hair, those images kind of validated or reinforced those stereotypes that we talked about of slave conditioning towards white supremacy?
Well, I actually want to pull River Naomi in, because part of, I think, that scene around the hug with the judge was her offering the Bible.
Right.
And offering Amber Geiger the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had a reaction to that, but I also wanted to hear from River Naomi about how that is also sort of tied into that.
And after that, we have a caller on line one, but yes, let's give the microphone to Reverend Naomi.
Yeah. I think it was almost like, Christianity was a kind of third person on trial. I mean, there was a way in which the tone. I mean, it was living in the room that this young man was faithful, right? That people who talked about him talked about his piety, talked about his church involvement, talked about his church leadership, talked about, the goodness of his heart. And so it was like, I wasn't surprised when yesterday jurors spoke out and talked about how what both of them would have wanted as a Christian man influenced, their notions of what both of them would have wanted influenced their decision-making around sentencing, right? So it was just so bizarre to me that this was an evangelical moment. I recognized it as a moment of proselytizing. Very, very bizarre. I mean, so what he was doing was extending forgiveness, but almost like as a commercial. And listen, I'm not trying to. This young man, I really don't want to. I don't want to lampoon him or his decision or his inner process or whatever. But it was a commercial for Christianity, right? It was a commercial for turning the other cheek, for saying from the cross, right? From the literal cross, I absolve you, or somebody please absolve them, right? And so, it was fascinating to me to see then, the giving of the Bible and the extension of the call to convert. All of that seems to suggest that there are some civil notions of morality and of piety connected to a particular kind of colonized Christianity that pervade, in spite of ourselves, in a legal setting, right? That everybody suddenly wanted to share Jesus tracts. I mean, it was very, and it made me bristle, and I thought about. I mean, my immediate response was, this is trauma. What I'm seeing is trauma, and when we can code our responses to trauma in religious language, in religious ritual, right? This is what helps me cope. This is what helps me move through. This is what I need to protect myself. I need to be hyper pious because I can't get justice, right? So where can I have agency? Where can I have power? Where can I make something happen? Where can I find my dignity? I find it in kind of sort of boomeranging back to this Christian perfection, right? Because I can't get justice anyplace else. I can't get my brother back, right? So I am just, I've been enthralled and preoccupied with this for the last couple of days, particularly for the reasons you suggested, because this is a religious conversation just as much as it's a kind of legal one.
Yeah, I was watching Van Jones on CNN, and he has this show where he goes in to prisons and he brings the victims and the families of the victims eye to eye with the perpetrators. And he said he's never witnessed a situation. It's usually the black person forgiving the white person, but he never sees or never has an example of a white person forgiving a black supposedly perpetrator. We have Amin in North Philly, and we have Jacob on line 2 after him. Brother Amin, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First, I want to extend my congratulations to Sister Cam on her doctorate, and also thank your other guests there for them coming and sharing their thoughts with us. Real quick, I know you've got time. So my question is two-part. Actually, it's a comment and question. I'll get through it right quick here. My question is a little complicated in that you all have touched on bits and parts of it. Firstly, my comment. It's a very sad day for African Americans and America when we have all been psychologically conditioned to expect that a white cop can go into a black man's apartment, shoot him dead, and we all believe that she's going to walk. That's a very sad day for us, and as a country, most of us felt that she was going to walk. That tells us a lot about ourselves and about our country and our status. Now, my question, and this is directed to Dr. Cam, being that it's built in a psychological aspect. How do we fortify ourselves from being psychologically defeated in a society where racism has predominated over years? Where do we start, and how do we sustain it? Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Amin. Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Cam, you got the question?
I'll just say very briefly so we can get to your next caller. I think the way that we fortify ourselves is by having more honest conversations, and that we acknowledge, again, the complexity of what we're attempting to address, and that we're also, I think, having these conversations with our children, and that we're naming and sort of identifying the pain that we feel. I think part of, Reverend Naomi mentioned sort of this like hyper piety. I think part of what is also at times used against us is this, look at how resilient Black people are.
Mm-hmm.
Like for centuries, we've tried to basically crush them, and they continue to exist, right? I mean, and so it's in some ways that because you're so resilient, because you're so strong, you withstand all of the suffering. We'll put you on this pedestal, and so you're not allowed to even have the full range of human emotion anymore. And so I think introducing the right to rage, the right to being upset and to being confused and angry, and so we can balance out sort of this expectation of, just kind of free-flowing love and mercy and kindness and compassion. It's like, yes, that is present, but we are also have been taught to suppress the rage that we feel. So I think just allowing some space for the conversation and also for the emotions that come along with the experiences we have.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for that. We're going to go to Jacob in Alni on line 2. Labbaik Jake, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, and assalamu alaikum to all my sisters there. Brother Qasim, it's I think in a way, man, we got to take that color thing out of there. I'm all about my race and my color, but in Islam, we know that Allah is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said that I myself will only get to Jannah by his mercy. So we got to give mercy to receive it. That's in the Bible, right? I think we make it true because if we look at what the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, did when he entered Mecca victorious with 10,000 soldiers, right? He didn't go and kill the people who killed his family members and treated the Muslims bad. He could have did that. He could have killed the man who killed his uncle Hamza, right? Who wound up accepting Islam, right? But didn't he say something to the effect that all behind closed doors is safe, right? He didn't go in with vengeance. Like I hear people want the brother who hugged that woman said, I'm not doing this because my family, I'm doing this for myself on my own. This is for me. And I don't have anything to do with my family. I just want to, in my own soul, give forgiveness because he said that this is the way my brother would have wanted me to do it. Now, for other people to say that it's ugly or something, how could forgiveness that God tells us in Christianity and Islam that we should, in a way, forgive because we're going to need his forgiveness on the day of judgment, how could we look at that as so negative and bad when it's coming from the Spirit of God?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my question. Thank you.
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
So I think one of the things that it's important to realize is that in Islamic law, right? Because Islam, there's sort of spiritual factors, and then there's law.
Mm-hmm.
In Islamic law, forgiveness is not mandated; it is an option.
Correct.
And what I mean by that is that the families have the right to demand a certain punishment, right, which is established in the law for transgressions of this sort. And so what the Quran says is that if they forgive, it is better. However, it does allow for you to say, you know what, you killed this person, then your life is forfeit, right? And so it's not just this blanket sort of, okay, if, somebody steals from you, sort of restitution is a central principle in Islamic law, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can't sort of gloss over that and to say that, like it's just forgiveness without accountability, forgiveness without reckoning,
Right.
forgiveness without, right? That's not my understanding of the Islamic position.
Yeah. Well,
and of course there are different interpretations of that. And I think that part of what we're talking about here, to sort of also speak to what Brother Jacob's question was, is not that we're saying that forgiveness is evil or forgiveness is terrible.
Well, it's viewed as a weakness.
What we are saying is that in many cases, particularly where there is a very long, well-established history of uneven power relations and violence that ensues as a result of those uneven, lopsided power relations, is that forgiveness is something that can be weaponized when it is demanded from the more powerful and to the less powerful.
Excellent point.
Exactly. So right, and so we can't, it's not. Somebody who has done me a wrong does not have the right to demand and insist upon forgiveness from me. That is my decision to make. If I make it, I make it. But I should not be in a position where I have to make that decision under duress, because then it's not forgiveness, it's something else.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
So
can I just add really quickly? I did watch some of the testimony of Bolton Jean's mother, and she said, "I am worried about my son," right? Meaning Brant Jean, right? He's about 16, 17 years old, and so again, this is not. I think Reverend Naomi mentioned this as well. This is not an indictment. We are not indicting the brother, right? But we're talking about a pattern and a system of this expectation, and so when there is this. There is, again, the range of emotion, right, that is experienced is completely eliminated, right, that we have to move from shock, right, to peace and forgiveness. Like, this is, again, a superhuman expectation, right, and that we even know from our own tradition that when our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, when he lost the people that he loved, right, either through sickness or through violence, he had a lot of feelings about it, right? And people witnessed this, right? They witnessed his year of sorrow. They witnessed how difficult it was for the prophet of God, right, to lose the people that he loved. And so this expectation that we, as like mere mortals, right, that we don't also have this complicated range of emotion, I think it is a further injustice to say that we cannot experience those emotions, right? That we have only one of two options, right? And that is to move to very patient, graceful, forgiveness, right? Or we're heathens who have not taken in the Word of God, right? And so again,
and I think
we are not given those options, then it is another crime that is committed against us.
And I think just very quickly, I think it's telling that most of the public conversation around what happened in that courtroom is focusing on the hug that Brant Jean gave to Amber, and not his mother's comments, which talked about the continuing corruption and the need for accountability, in police conduct and so forth. We're not having those discussions. We're having a discussion about forgiving, without conditions, right? Which is sort of interesting.
Now, what do you? And I don't know, because probably Donna's. I'm talking about when the Learning Tree Synagogue tragedy occurred. Muslims were probably, from Brother Tariq, I can't remember his group, gave close to $1 million to the Learning Tree Synagogue. But when Mother Emanuel, African Methodist Church in South Carolina, was shot up by Dylan Ruth, we didn't see that outpouring of support, loving forgiveness in that example. What does that say about the racial dynamic for compassion when it is a race-related or ethnic-related tragedy?
Well, I mean, that's what I mean, I think that the quick expression of forgiveness by some members of the family, and want to be clear that not all of the families of the 9 have expressed forgiveness. And in fact, some of them have said, we ain't there yet. You know.
Well, what I'm talking about, Reverend Naomi, specifically is from the outside, from the community that said, yo, this is something that we can rally around and we can help this church. We saw that at the Learning Tree Synagogue in Pittsburgh, but I don't think we saw that. Let's rebuild this church. Let's help this church.
Well, that's what what I mean is that the quick expression of forgiveness, I think, serves to, I think, as Dr. Cam was saying, and Donna was saying, to redirect the energy. I mean, so if the families, they cool with it. The family said they all right with it. Black folk just, keep on trucking. And the AME Church, said, we will continue. We will still, they continue to have Bible study in that room.
I can't imagine.
I saw there was a documentary that Stephen Curry and others were behind called Emmanuel. And it had very limited screenings over Juneteenth weekend this summer. And in that documentary, we saw that one of the surviving victims, so she was in that basement that night, asked the church to not have Bible study in that room because, it's a site of trauma. And the church refused, right? I mean, this was one of the, and so, I think this appearance of, and this performance, I must say performance, of resilience, of piety, of we gonna get through anything, come hell or high water, we will be okay, serves to sort of, I think, both mask some of the internalized trauma that works itself out in our communities, and it is almost like closing the door on outside support, because it's like, okay, so y'all got it together. I mean, it's bizarre. It doesn't make any sense to me, but I think that's how some of it gets played out. It's like, well, they seem to be cool with it. They've resolved within themselves to move on, and so we can take our compassion elsewhere too.
So Donna, I was trying to bring you in on that because you're a native of Pittsburgh. What did you think about the huge Muslim donation to the Tree of Life Synagogue in the backdrop of that tragedy, and why do you think you don't see it at Mother Emanuel?
Well, I mean, I did grow up in Pittsburgh. I grew up a stone's throw from that synagogue. It's actually very close to where I lived and grew up, and it's a tragedy. And I'm not opposed in any way to whatever sort of outpourings of support that sort of came in the wake of that. I do think that Muslim communities in the U.S., which are among some of the most internally diverse communities in the world, meaning a range of ethnicities, races, language, national origins, approaches to the faith, that sort of thing. Many times, I think it's just important to realize that Muslims have all of these things that sort of play out on a macro level outside of the Muslim community. So anti-blackness, white supremacy. Muslims are not apart from society in any way, so they are also impacted by these sorts of things as well. And so, so that's really my answer to that. I know at the time of that particular shooting, there was a fundraising campaign for that synagogue, which I supported, but I also was a part of a team of Muslims that organized to raise money for the two individuals in Kentucky who were shot in a similar type of situation in very close temporal proximity to that. So we actually did launch a mostly Black Muslim initiated response to actually offer monetary support to those families, because they were also victims of the same sort of white supremacist violent logic that includes anti-Semitism and anti-Blackness as its manifestations. And so I think that really, honestly, all that we can do, right, is to sort of make sure that we're drawing attention to whatever tragedies occur and wherever they occur, and to make sure that, like Reverend Naomi mentioned earlier, that sometimes religious language can sort of cloak acts of sort of language of piety and sort of, seeming pious behavior can sort of mask some of these underlying troublesome dynamics. So racism and sort of internalized preferential treatment over, for one group of human beings over another can also sort of dictate where our compassion goes and where it doesn't go. And so I mean, that's basically it. I mean, it's not, in the same way that, that notions of forgiveness sort of flow in particular directions dictated by our social relations, right, as a society, right, other sorts of acts of worship and human compassion can sort of also follow those same patterns as well.
So this one, go ahead.
I know we're running low on time, but I just want to make one point, and I'll try to do this really quickly, that there is, to extend a comment that Reverend Naomi mentioned, is that when we offer this quick forgiveness, right, and then people say, okay, they're fine, let's move on, right, they seem to have this under control, and so we're not sort of the beneficiaries of care, right, of concern, of consideration. And again, this goes back to the humanization of Black people. And so, when we have research on medical students where it is clear that there's this belief that Black people literally have a higher pain tolerance, right? They believe that Black skin is thicker, so that when they're, administering any medicine or doing blood draws, like, we don't feel the same kind of pain as other people, particularly white people, right? And so this is literally the belief that Black people do not feel pain. And so when I would say that when these instances occur, right, and it becomes the center of the conversation becomes around Amber Geiger and about the hug towards her, I think, and even I, like to myself, would say, how do I pivot this conversation? And it is to ask myself, what do I need? What does my community need in this moment, right? Where is the pain and how is it being expressed? How is it being manifested, right, in emotional and physical ways, right? And I said, I think that we all need sort of like a mental health kind of healing day after these kind of events, because we're still in a state of shock and you're moving through a lot of different spaces that don't acknowledge that. So I think one of the ways that we can continue to care for ourselves when other people don't is to ask the question, we acknowledge the pain that we are all experiencing. What do we need for each other?
Okay, Cam, I want to get my last question into you. The judge in the case, Tammy Kemp, and the police chief, Renee Hall, both strong Black women, and they are getting drugged by the community because the police commissioner supposedly mishandled some things. Gene Botham's mother talked about the corruption in the department. There were a lot of things that could have been done better. But in the long run, or the short of it is, they are both being drugged by the Black community. What do you have to say about that? Or what are your observations about that?
Well, one, I think it's for us to look at the individual, but also the system in which they're operating, right? So I'm not going to say she doesn't know what she's doing or she's just a victim. No, she's actively participating, right, in a system that's already designed to our disadvantage. And so I think that she will be on the receiving end of, people who are angry, right, about how she conducted herself in court. And I think that she needs to understand the repercussions, right? There are going to be consequences to your participation, your complicity in a system that is designed to oppress Black people, right? There's no way around that. And so I think that we can't, when there's sort of even a Black officer that kills a Black person, right, we can't just say, well, they didn't know what they were doing, right? So I think, again, it goes back to how can we have more nuanced conversations, and sometimes that doesn't happen publicly because we're always being watched and kind of monitored in a certain way that we can't just have space to really work through all of the complicated things we're feeling.
Alhamdulillah. Well, we want to thank our host, our guest. I'm your host, Reverend Naomi. I want to just say it, Dr. Donna and Dr. Cam. We got to do this again. You guys are incredible guests to have. You're very powerful black sisters in the community, doing a lot of good, doing a lot of work to help the healing in our community, and we just want to thank you for coming. Next week, our brother Nafis Bowie, I don't know if he's going to be here next week. I doubt it seriously. He suffered from a stroke. If you're friends with him on Facebook, he's been talking about it. Make dua, that's prayers for our brother Nafis. We want to thank everyone who's been listening today. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Thank you for listening to Islam Today. Assalamu alaikum.
Be in love with a system that's molding you.
Word Show on the Go. Tell us where you'd like to see the rapping professor, Dr. Aaron Smith, bring the Word Show on the Go team next. Visit wordradio.com. Click the Word Show on the Go banner and let us know about your community event, big news in your community, or an issue you'd like to see addressed. You can also catch up on the latest episode of Word Show on the Go or binge watch previous episodes. It's Word Show on the Go with the rapping professor, Dr. Aaron Smith, exclusively on wordradio.com. Word Show on the Go is funded in part by the Facebook Journalism Project Community Network. Join Word Radio for the EcoWord Environmental Justice Summit, Sunday, October 20th from 2 p.m. till 5 p.m. at Bartram's Garden, 5400 Lindbergh Boulevard. This unique green event will feature lightning talks about the connections between race, income, and the environment, locally, nationally, regionally, and especially in Philadelphia. Featuring John Francis, author of Planet Walker and The Ragged Edge of Silence, Janine Kayembe, founder of Life Do Grow Farm, Zuline Mayfield, environmental activist, Joanne Douglas, program manager of the Watershed Interpretation and Youth River Program at Bartram's Garden.